Welcome to Driving with Marley, the podcast where we dive into stories, relationships, and opportunities shaping the future of high barrier investments like data centers and sports. Today, I'm your driver, hopefully your friend, and your host, Marley Hughes. And we have an incredible guest, my business partner and my personal friend, Kyle Israel, joining us. Kyle's journey is nothing short of inspiring. From leading on the field as the quarterback at UCF to founding a sports health tech startup, and now as the main partner focused on sports investments here at MHP, he's someone who truly understands the intersection of sports, innovation, and relationships. In this episode, we'll explore Kyle's passion for sports, what drew him to MHP, and his perspective on the exciting world of sports and sports investment and the intersection of that with sports real estate. Welcome to Driving with Marley podcast, where we dive into the stories, the relationships, and the opportunities shaping the future of high barrier investments like data centers and sports. Today, I'm your driver, hopefully your friend, and your host, Marley Hughes. And today we have an incredible guest, a business partner, and my personal friend joining us, Kyle Israel. Kyle's journey is nothing short of inspiring. From leading on the football field as a quarterback at UCF to founding a sports health tech startup, and now our primary partner on the sports side of Magnolia Hill Partners. He's someone who truly understands the intersection of sports, innovation, and relationships. In this episode, we'll explore Kyle's passion for sports, what drew him to MHP, and his perspective on the exciting opportunities ahead, particularly in the sports world. We'll also dive into the relationships that are at the heart of everything we do here at MHP, and that's why it makes all the difference. So let's get started. Kyle, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Marley, thanks for having me. Excited to be here on Driving with Marley. I feel special to have made the slate of guests that you have, and looking forward to a discussion about a topic that I think about every day and that I've thought about for a long time in my life, and that's sports, and in particular, sports as an investment class, which is super exciting to be a part of.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing that we're not actually driving together today because, as you know, and as most of my friends know, I'm a terrible driver. So I'm glad that we're doing this stationary today, because that could be bad news. So maybe I shouldn't drive with any of my guests in the future, but should do it like this. But really excited to have you. And I mean that on the top end. You are a great friend, obviously a great business partner, and I'm excited to get into sports. And I was thinking about kind of the origin story of where we met. And it was actually before we met. That's probably maybe the most interesting part of the story is, my freshman year at UCF, which is both of our alma mater, was the first year that we had and opened the on-campus stadium at UCF, the football stadium. And the opening game that August, I remember it was dreadfully hot, was against Texas. And what were they ranked? Top 5 or top 10 in the country at that time?
Yeah, I think they were, 5 or 6 in the country. They had Colt McCoy at quarterback, Jamal Charles at running back, just a stacked squad, Mac Brown on the other sideline. So it was quite the team to open a new stadium against.
Absolutely. So I'm your freshman nerd coming into a football game for the first time. I didn't know who the heck you were before that. Saw you on the field almost. I mean, what an incredible game. It was the first game, like I said, in the stadium. Almost beat them on national television. All my family was watching. And bring it full circle. Here we are. We're friends. We're business partners. I mean, I couldn't have led a horse to water back then, and you were leading the football field and the football team on the field at that point. And so, like I said in the last podcast, if you guys listened, life is so happenstance. And I'm so blessed to have you as a friend and as a business partner. Why don't you give the listeners a bit of a background just on who is Kyle and, what you've been involved in over the years and how you got here to MHP?
Yeah, absolutely. I heard this recently and I thought it applied to myself. I think from a professional perspective, I've had, really a Forrest Gump journey, a lot of really cool experiences, really cool opportunities. Sometimes they were correlated, many times they weren't, but through all that, I learned a ton about a number of different industries, and a number of different ways to do business. But prior to that, I've always, as you mentioned, been an athlete. I think, for better or worse, that was my identity for a long time as a teenager, and then really choosing to go to UCF, my hometown. I grew up, for those familiar with Orlando, on Dean Road, but generally 10 minutes from campus, and chose UCF over Florida State and Penn State, and was just super happy with that decision. Unpopular at the time compared to those other two schools and their reputations, but the right decision for me. So was the starting quarterback there, as you mentioned, in '07, led the team onto the field in Bright House Network Stadium. That was just unique and full circle now, thinking back to watching that stadium be developed kind of every day, and to recognize and see the value that having your own stadium had to our athletic department, to our university, to the local community. I didn't know that I'd be working on similar developments, 15 or 20 years later, but it was cool in reflection to see that stadium be built. So had a chance there. Won the conference championship in 2007. Was fortunate to. I knew I'd never go to the NFL. My hands were too small to hold an NFL ball. It's a different size than the collegiate ball. But nonetheless, still wanted to play. Still wanted to break out of that bubble of East Orlando. Spent some time in Moscow playing, Germany and Poland, really with the goal of how do I broaden my horizons? How do I meet new people? How do I lead groups of men in other countries from different cultures with different languages toward a common goal on a football field? And I'd be lying if I said that was my clear objective then, but I recognize that that's the value of what I took away. And then the learnings from that experience on the field and internationally really gave me, just a great set of tools to bring to business. And so I'd call myself an entrepreneur from my early 20s, have been a part of the hospitality industry, whether it be, restaurants or even a nightclub that was, a one-off concept that we owned. But then in the master franchisee space, so, really cutting my teeth in the hard business of hospitality and making that work and making that profitable, and had some really good success there with great partners along the way. At the same time, I've spent a long time in the broadcasting space, whether that be radio or television, specifically on sports. And then as an entrepreneur, specifically in the sports and health tech space, as you mentioned, with a company called Nestry, which is an acronym for NeuroStrength. And that was in the sports, still is in the sports and health tech space, very much focused on fitness from the neck up and performance from the neck up. So leveraging neuroplasticity and the brain to create better performers and to mitigate some of the symptoms of challenges from TBI and cognitive decline. So as you can imagine, going from the hospitality world and some of the other businesses I've been in to the venture capital world, raising external capital from sophisticated investors who are return focused, was a great learning experience for me. It really shaped how I think about investing now on the other side of the table, and really opened my eyes to what was possible and what was taking place beyond the typical local general businesses that I had been a part of, and really what that helped shape. That was really where we to some degree really connected, where Magnolia Hill and our family office was at the time our largest investor in Nestry. Our relationship initially came out of being on the UCF alumni board, but getting to know John Shane and Marley through that process with Nestry was fantastic. And then, without going into too much of a deep dive because time is limited, through that I met my fiance, who was born and raised in Berlin, Germany, and made a decision to, which was very, very difficult, leave the day-to-day role in Nestry. We found out that we were going to be having a daughter, so I moved full-time to Berlin, and spent some time, taking a break, kind of reimagining my professional career, and thinking about my next move. And you and I just kept up dialogue over those first, really the first year that I was over there, and that led me to joining the team now at MHP, where I get to focus on an asset class, an emerging asset class in sports that I love. Obviously, very relationship driven, which I love, And, it was great to partner back up with you and John and our team, which are, people that I, wanted to work with, value your friendship and our relationships. And, here we are.
I love that. I love that. I think we've all got like, really incredible but diverse backgrounds here. And I mean, from living and growing up in Florida to living in Russia, playing football in Russia, playing football games all around the US, to be a serial entrepreneur in a variety of different industries and sectors, hospitality being potentially one of the hardest and most challenging, and then being a founder of a health tech startup, which we love. Nestry was something that was and still is near and dear to our heart relative to what that can accomplish. And you guys were making huge strides and still are making huge strides relative to just the groundbreaking technology and advancements in helping folks with their brain, which is crazy. But then moving to Germany, having a family, and then coming full circle to now leading our investment practice on sports across the globe. And it's not just in the US, it's in Europe because you live in Europe now. I just think, your background is so fascinating. You've got so many great stories from your time abroad and otherwise. When we think about sports, or when John Shane and I thought about sports, when we were first looking at Nestry, there was a lot of reasons why we were interested in it. It was like I said, very entrepreneurial, tech focused. It was a venture type of investment for us, but it was really doing something incredible for the customers and clients, helping people that had, traumatic injuries of their brain in the past, both athletes and non-athletes, improving the mental stamina. There's a variety of impact oriented things that we loved about that when we invested in that. Sports generally, for one reason or another, as an investment class, has gotten this nomenclature that it's a vanity investment, that there's not really money to be made on it. But I think those times have changed a lot. And I know we've spent a lot of time as a team. You spent a lot of time as an individual, really understanding sports as an ecosystem and as an investable asset class. I'd be curious your perspective. Again, I kind of joke, John Shane is definitely not the example of somebody that cares about vanity. What are your thoughts when people say sports is just a vanity investment, and how do you articulate the opportunities that you're seeing in the space today?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I love working with a group where the vanity element isn't the most important element. John driving his Mercury Mountaineer late into his career while highly successful, just illustrates his lack of vanity, and it's still funny. But it was for many years, and if you think about the big four sports, heavily family centric in the sense that it was a lot of just families rather than private equity or institutions that owned some of these premier assets across sports, both domestically in the US and around the globe. But as of late, some of the loosening from really the NBA early on and the NHL and MLB, and then lately with the NFL, the loosening of rules and restrictions and regulations as it pertains to private equity entering the space has really changed sports ownership dynamics. It's allowed more, sophisticated capital come in. It's allowed teams, leagues, media right holders to think about, the asset class in a different way, depending on who you talk to. Some would say it is an asset class today. Some would say it's definitely an emerging asset class. But there are a lot of core components and a lot of, elements of the business just beyond the teams. And so I think that was one of the early learnings for me, understanding stadiums and arenas and those assets or those things as assets and revenue generating centers for both team ownership and other partners that are involved. But I think that on a go forward basis, we've seen the like of some other great groups that have been established for a long time, Avenue and Aries, and there's a number of them that were early in the space and have been able to formulate a structure that has allowed others to think about how they could be more active in sports. So, you're seeing it at various levels. Obviously, there's a lot of, um, capital, and there needs to be a lot of capital with the valuations today in the big four sports leagues across the country that, um, there's a lot of groups pursuing opportunities there. I think there's what I'll call, whether the term is right or wrong, the middle market of sports, where you think about emerging leagues, where you think about expansion teams. Obviously, soccer comes to the surface. The world's most popular game is continuing to grow here in the U.S., both on the men's and probably more notably today on the women's side with the NWSL. And what you get with these emerging leagues and these emerging teams is part of the asset class that is more accessible, from a size of check necessity, where the valuations aren't as frothy as what you see in the big four. There is a lot of creativity in the space. How do you think about stadium? How do you think about real estate in addition to investing in a team? And at the end of the day, there's a lot of ways to have impact in investments, in whatever vertical you are. If you're building multifamily housing, you're providing a solution to the local, citizens of a city with more housing, right? Like, you're having an impact. In sports, it's massively human centric, from, the principal or the chairman of a team or an organization or a league, all the way down to, the parking attendants, the game day support and staff. Like, it's humans all the way around. And so I think it's a great asset class. It's outperformed the S&P 500 over the last 10 to 15 years. It's growing. And, I really believe we're in the early innings and just scratching the surface on the industry as a whole through a capital lens. And, to pair that with the ability to have a massive impact on multiple levels of humans and a community along the way, I think is exciting for me. And I just love the idea of being a part of an organization where, it's outcome oriented. You've got to perform on the pitch or the field or the court or the ice. But at the same time, you've got to perform from a business perspective, and ensuring that the organization stays viable and can create returns for investors. And you put all those together in a blender, and it's just generally super exciting to wake up and be in that space every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hit a couple things there. I'm going to take this a couple different directions at the same time. So interesting your perspective. I've lived my entire life in the US, all over the US, but in the US, you've obviously lived around the world and now live in Germany. You talked about soccer, women's soccer, men's soccer. Give us your perspective relative to where you think soccer is, because you're seeing how ingrained it is to the everyday culture in Europe, as an example, and you grew up playing American football here in the US. Talk about where you think soccer goes specifically here in the US and what inning we are in, both men's and women's, compared to the rest of the world, and why we're excited about soccer.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think, first and foremost, my experience in Europe is it's very much a religion, right? I mean, it is generational, to where, grandparents, parents, children are all pulling for the same club. There's no option with that, and so it's just very, very much ingrained into the culture. I experienced that with my own family in Europe, who are big supporters of Hertha there in Berlin, which is in the Bundesliga, the second division. They wouldn't like to hear that, but I see the impact and the love that our family has for that club, and it's not too indifferent from what you see here at the collegiate level and the fanaticism around college sports. Um, but soccer is a huge deal, and I think that somebody that's been in soccer here in the U.S. 15 years ago would laugh at me today and saying that I still think it's in the early stages. Now I think the MLS as a league has done a really good job of growing the game. I think there were some critical moments in time in the late 90s, with the Women's World Cup and just some events, experiences that really brought soccer, and at that time heavily women's soccer, to the mainstream. both at the game level and at the athlete level. You saw stars emerge, Mia Hamm and others in that phase. And I think that soccer has continued to grow off the back of that. And there's another cycle around the corner, with league tournament, with the World Cup coming to the U.S., with the Olympics that are going to be here in 2028 in LA, where there's going to be another inflection point of growth in the sport. And it's at all levels. I mean, from the academy system at the youth level, soccer is massive. There's definitely, I think, a shift in youth sports, where soccer is not just something that is kind of that funny sport that they play on TV in another part of the world. It's entered the mainstream in the minds of youth across the country and the minds of parents across the country, which drives fanaticism to the professional teams in the local markets, whether that be MLS, whether that be the USL and the USL Championship, which we can talk about further. But I think we're at the early stages. There's a unique opportunity, I think, in infrastructure, stadium, real estate development around the game of soccer. People are thinking more creatively in how they design stadiums that can be used year round, but still be, the host of their local teams, when it comes to soccer. And generally, I think that, people will continue to become fans of the games. I mean, something just simple is that I love about soccer is when it's going to be over. It's 45 minutes, there's a halftime, there may be a few extra minutes, 45 minutes, and that's it. And from a consumer
I
perspective,
love that.
from a media perspective, it's really cool.
Yeah. Now, a couple things. I mean, you obviously grew up being an athlete. I played a couple sports early on, but I've got three kids now. My oldest is 7, and we've been really lucky to live in a part of the country down here in Orlando, Lake Nona, that's really a great intersection of sports and health tech and just young families. From my perspective, driving around and seeing my daughter's friends, they all play soccer. I drive, by the local rec fields. They're full of matches of soccer. I'm not that old yet. I mean, I'm approaching 40, but I don't remember that when I was a kid. You're talking about, kind of the relevance of it and the velocity of it at the youth level. Correct me if I'm wrong. Were a lot of kids playing, for me, they were playing baseball and football when they were youth in my generation, and now I see almost entirely soccer. Did you see a lot of soccer when you were growing up, or was that, like you said, kind of like the odd sport to be playing when you were younger in the 90s?
Yeah, it was definitely the odd sport. I mean, I had a handful of friends that would play here or there, but our core focus, my core focus, but my friend's core focus was football, Pop Warner at the time, baseball, whether that be travel ball or little league, basketball, whether here locally that was FBVA or AAU, and I think that you've definitely seen volleyball and soccer in particular really explode at the youth level, across the country. And so, yeah, my experience was similar to yours. It was not something that I thought about playing. I didn't know the rules. I didn't care about knowing the rules. It seemed like if, it can be boring if you don't know what you're watching. Like that was my interpretation. But with a little bit of education, a little bit of exposure to the game, you start to see why the rest of the world loves it so much.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the demographic trends there. I mean, as you know, we spent a lot of time with the Jacksonville team, the expansion team with Tim Tebow and Ricky Kaplan and the folks up there. And we recently announced the acquisition of a very large youth academy, and just seeing again like the excitement, the number of kids playing in today's world. I just think, again, I grew up playing golf. Golf's a lifetime sport. But I think just with the propensity of the amount of youth players, whether you're an academy or playing recreationally on the weekend, I think that sticks in a very, very meaningful way in terms of fandom and the engagement with the future generation. So that's one reason I'm really excited about soccer. You touched on something relative to real estate, which I know we're really focused on here. And I'm curious your perspective. We talked at the top of this about my first football game, actually knowing who you were and watching you was the opening of our on-campus stadium in 2007. Before that, I don't know what the stadium was called, but it was a much more disheveled stadium downtown Orlando, in a much rougher part of Orlando. Can you talk about being a player first for the perspective before we get to the real estate? playing at that stadium, again, you can name the name if you remember it, and then the difference that you guys felt as players and the energy you got between playing there and playing on campus in front of, all those students and people in a brand new campus that was yours, that you felt like home. Does that make a difference to you guys?
It was a game changer, and it was a game changer in many ways. I guess, in collegiate athletics, you think of recruiting, right? And just having an on-campus stadium was really important for that. We played at the Citrus Bowl, at least that's what it was called at the time, in downtown. I think it was probably 65 to 70,000 seats. In those days, UCF was drawing 25 to 35,000 fans. So even if we had a good turnout, for our standards, it still felt half empty. You were still missing that energy and that buzz that comes as a part of having a full stadium, no matter the size. Just, quick side note, I've played in many tiny stadiums across Europe, but if the stadium holds 4,000 or if it holds 10,000, if it's full, it really still creates an incredible environment. And so, for us, I think it gave us a distinct advantage on the field. It certainly did at home. It had more of a modular construction. It still does today, which meant it was a lot of aluminum, which was very loud when people bang their feet on it. It has, the nickname of the bounce house, because of, the bounciness of the aluminum. But I think that it gave us a distinct advantage on the field. It gave our fan base, who had supported us for so long, playing in this kind of, older kind of dinosaur stadium, a new place to call home. It allowed the alumni who returned for games to actually return to campus, which just enhanced the overall student experience of waking up from your dorm or from your apartment, either being on campus or driving 2 or 3 minutes or taking an Uber or a bus to campus. You're able to tailgate there, and then go into the stadium. Like you can't recreate that without having the stadium that you're in control of. And so I think it changed UCF. I think it took us into a new era. I think it allowed us to recruit better athletes, which paid off for us in 2017 when we went undefeated. Like, I think the stadium was still there was a direct correlation in having the stadium and our on field success. Um, but today, as an alumni and as a fan who, tries to, much less now than before moving to Germany, return to some games, it just creates an overall incredible game day experience where I show up, I spend some money on campus, I'm there early, I stay after, and I know that I just get to return to my alma mater and take it all in. So
Yeah.
it was huge for the university, and was a competitive advantage at the end of the day.
Yeah. And obviously we've been focused on that element a lot lately, right? It's the intersection of sports real estate and the business of sports. And we just touched on it a little bit relative to what it kind of emboldened you as a player, having your own place, your own locker room where you felt like it was at home as an alumni. You spent more on campus. Talk about what we're seeing out there. So that was what, 2007, which is crazy to think about. That was almost 15 years ago, or more than that, actually, almost 20 years ago. Talk about that then, and then what we're seeing now, both in Europe and in the US. And maybe you can even parse between Europe and the US because they're actually quite different. But how folks and developments are adjusting to the present day, how these stadiums are catalyzing mixed use sites across the country and across the globe, and where you're seeing the opportunity there.
Yeah, keep me on track here because there's so many directions I could go. But if you just rewind a little bit, you think about a stadium in the past, and it was this big old, piece of, real estate, typically surrounded by large parking lots. And the experience was, coming to the parking lot and tailgating. But that was really, the only additional experience that was provided, prior or after a game. And and there's a lot of smart people in the commercial real estate space, and you started to see it. There's, the Battery in Atlanta. There's LA Live. SoFi's trying to do something with their new stadium and surrounding it, where they're looking at creating experiences and really leveraging place making to create live, work, play environments, with the stadium being the focal point. Um, but building real estate, whether that be multifamily, whether that be mixed use, F&B, hospitality, music venues, there is a push to create a better overall experience for fans, an environment where fans spend more time around the stadium, in the community. I think it elevates the presence of a team when people are living, working, and playing, just around it. And there's a clear, emphasis by owners in the Big Four that have land around their stadium to work with, um, and or expansion teams in the Big Four leagues, going into new markets and really thinking about from the beginning, okay, how do we use the stadium as a focal point? How do we create programming that, um, you know, brings in revenue and draws an audience beyond just whatever sport is traditionally played in that stadium? To really, as an ownership group, have that asset work for you more than just, the games that you play in it on an annual basis. Um, and it all, I think what's most compelling and where we've double clicked is that it's really at all level of sports. So going back to that middle market, when you get into some of these, from a size perspective, secondary cities or non-primary cities across the U.S., there's a real opportunity to create unique experiences in these cities that haven't had it before. And so, when leagues are growing, whether that be the USL, there's the MLS Next Pro, which people may be less familiar with. There's markets, there's cities across the country that love their local teams, that want to create unique experiences for fans. And so I think it creates a flywheel of synergy with citizens, with team ownership groups, with and for real estate developers. Um, and that's heavily here in the US, but in Europe, I think, they're also starting to think about, especially with soccer, now cricket is really coming into the fold. How do we duplicate that over there? Well, some of the challenges are they're working with less land. Some of these cities have been, designed for hundreds of years. There can be some challenges in repurposing land, et cetera. But I think from a general perspective, owners over there are starting to see the value, for their bottom line, but also for the value of their impact on the local community, that comes with, more programming and more opportunities for people to find entertainment, especially families, beyond just a sport or going to, a local restaurant on the side of the road, near your house. And so we've continued to lean into that. We think on the real estate side, and the market shows that the land and the real estate developed around these stadiums really becomes a premium commercial real estate asset, that has a premium value compared to, other similar commercial real estate projects in a given market. And so we believe that there's an opportunity to be a part of the real estate, to be a part of the teams, to help catalyze either stadium enhancements or stadium development. And it's very much a focus in the US. I think it'll continue to be a growing focus in Europe. And it's not just stadiums, but it's also arenas or other multi-use facilities for sports specifically, that are, the great thing about humans is that we like to be creative, and you're just starting to see a lot of really creative types of opportunities cross our desk that, open our eyes and our minds to, what is possible when you're creating experiential entertainment.
Absolutely. And talk a little bit about As we wrap up here, talk a little bit about the intersection of sports and sports ownership and the operating side of the business, because the operating side of the business, you said it before, is really dynamic. You're running a team, whether men's or women's or both. You're running sponsorships, you're running academies potentially, you're trying to figure out parking revenue and everything that happens under that entire operating business. And these sports teams, whether in a big city or a secondary city, like you said, can be hugely influential in the municipalities and the cities. People are fanatical about them. People live and die by them sometimes. But then you've got the real estate impact as well. You talked about, creating shelter with multifamily, creating experiential retail places where you can dine and have fun with your family and go to a ball game. Talk about how we see both what we call kind of the opco and that propco and the blend of those two in a new environment now here, being accessible. Sports is now accessible to, families like us, but now to high net worth individuals as well. How do you see the blend of how we look at sports maybe a little bit differently than others are attacking it today?
Yeah, I think, taking a step back for a second, a lot of what's driven valuations, what's driven a lot of the capital coming into sports is obviously media, right? And, cable cutting and these new platforms or platforms that existed that are starting to turn towards sports entertainment. We've seen it with Amazon, with Netflix recently. And so that I think those media rights deals really drove, just a lot of that capital initially. And that is a big piece for many teams, not all, and many leagues, not all, is the media rights deal and drives a lot of the revenue. But at the end of the day, there's still the tickets piece, there's still the premium seating piece, there's still the sponsorship piece from, stadium naming rights to jersey sponsors, et cetera. And it can be pretty straightforward and at the same time complicated to execute that, all at the same time. And in the past, I think that's one of the benefits of institutional capital coming into sports, or family office capital that has experience investing and standing up businesses and other verticals, is you've seen a more, dare I say, institutional polish on how these businesses are operated. And I think that's been incredible for the product that we're seeing on fields, courts, and ice. I think you're seeing an enhanced product because of that. But for us in particular, there are a lot of groups that are out there looking for, I want to invest and be exposed to the, valuation up and to the right of the teams. Or I'm less interested in teams. I'm a real estate group by trade. And so we're interested in finding teams that need a real estate partner where our money's going to be made on developing the property, and exiting that property. And we're not exactly interested in being a part of the ownership group. And where we think we're differentiated and what gets me excited every day is we're pursuing both. And we're being very mindful and thoughtful about how we structure our platform to include both. And so when you have exposure and can, be a part of the ownership group, and for us today, we're not interested in being a majority control owner of a team. We're looking for a minority position into teams that have great operators and proven operators and know how to execute the strategy within that sport. For example, in Europe, you've got to have an operator in soccer in particular that understands player trading, because that's a huge revenue stream, is selling talent. You've got to have an operator that understands how to navigate promotion and relegation, which is very complex in itself. And there's a level of risk associated with that you don't see, for example, in the MLS. And so, we really think that when you can come in and back through a minority position, great operators, kind of roll up your sleeves and being willing to add value on the team, the operation side, but also with our experience in institutional commercial real estate, coming in and either being a part of the development group and or capitalizing the capital stack that needs to be in place for a large commercial development project. We become this bridge between team ownership and real estate developers, where we like to and continue to think about creating synergies between the ownership group, between the real estate developers, and I think that's extremely compelling. I think it gives us um, you know a distinct advantage in the sense that we can really, to some degree, because of the real estate, de-risk the overall team investment because of the commercial real estate piece. But you can also get exposed to enhanced returns that you typically may not find in a commercial real estate development because of the way the valuations at the professional team level are continuing to grow, across the country and across the globe. And so we feel like we've really created this strategy to have exposure on both sides, to be a conduit between both parties, and to really bring that all in house under the top co of the team ownership group. And we're just really excited and have dialed in on that, and believe that we're also in the early innings of infrastructure real estate paired with sports team ownership.
Yeah, I mean, we're just so excited about it, and there's a handful of proxies across the country that we're involved with now, and it's really interesting. Like you said, as we've really leaned into this, I saw how binary some of these great firms, and they're fantastic firms, think about their business, and rightfully so. They're very focused, but as we started really understanding the ownership lens from our own standpoint, and seeing that it wasn't just capital and strategic prowess that was needed at the business and the team level, but also at the real estate level and the intersection of those two. I'm just really excited about the opportunity there, and the opportunity to partner with great ownership groups across the country, help them figure out their real estate needs, but also be, like you said, the partner that comes in isn't just an economic check, but really strategic, and leverages our relationships, leverages our Rolodex, leverages our know-how, leverages everything about us, both on the operating side and the business side. So we're really excited
That's
about that.
that's a
I'm really,
that's a great point. Let me touch on that real quick. I think one of the other elements that I enjoy so much, and what I've recognized in a lot of businesses this way, but I think it's magnified in sports, is it's such a relationship business, right? At the end of the day, it really takes an intentional focus through a genuine, and yeah, really from a genuine place, to think short term, midterm, long term about how you build relationships and create value in relationships. Because we didn't find out about the deals that we're looking at or the deals that we're a part of, you know, on some platform, or, perhaps just directly from an investment banker who was running a process on a deal. It was the relationships that we had built and established and continue to build and establish that brought us the opportunities and will continue to bring us the opportunities. And I feel really good about that because we've taken a genuine approach. And I think that, the relationships, the friendships that I've built, really in this short time in the sports ecosystem, it's become very evident through those that that's what it's all about. And I think, thinking back on your podcast last week, that makes the overall professional experience richer. I enjoy getting to know people, breaking bread with people, having time to fellowship, and it's such an integral piece of the whole market, um, that it becomes really exciting and something that's been super super additive just to my personal life, to have all these new relationships. But it's also really critical to being able to continue to source opportunities and understand what's going on in the marketplace.
So for the listeners out there that are maybe running a family office, they're a high net worth or they're an individual and they're thinking about how do I get involved in sports? Again, we're building a lot of things and investing in a lot of things here. For the listeners out there, how can they start to learn about your perspective relative to sports, the vision at MHP, how to trade notes with you? What's the best way to collaborate with you if somebody's investigating sports?
We're obviously all very busy in the world today, but I love getting on the phone and, I did it with some other family offices earlier this week, just giving my general take of what I'm seeing, what I'm experiencing, um, you know, trends that are emerging. I just love to share it because I love to talk about it. So whether it's through through our direct website, just quickly here, K Israel, ISRAEL at magnoliahillpartners.com. Please feel free to reach out to me directly. If social media is easier, whether it's Twitter or Instagram, it's at the Kyle Israel, and I'd respond there. But generally, I would say have zero inhibition about reaching out, even if it's just to find out more. Um, and I'm willing to provide that, not just from an institutional capital perspective, and whether that be family offices or private equity groups or others, but really on the retail side. I think what's being created in sports are vehicles, whether that be SPVs or funds, to that can really create ways for the typical retail investor, that has capital on their balance sheet, that they want to invest, they want to get into sports, they want to get and be a part of something bigger than themselves, in an association with a team, also access to the asset class. And so definitely willing to educate or provide my perspective to that retail investor as well, who's saying, I've got some capital on the sidelines. It may not be a $2 million check or $1 million check, but I have a couple $100,000 that, I think this is a great, meaningful way for me to have an investment that's fun to track, that's fun to be a part of, that's fun to go experience. And at the end of the day, can make me some money along the way. And so just happy to discuss that with anybody.
That's awesome. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks so much for the time. We're excited to have you. We're going to have you on for a future podcast. We're going to be doing a lot in sports, and I think your perspective is great. And we mean that wholeheartedly. I mean, what Kyle just said, we are here to be a resource to anyone that's investigating anything that we're doing, data center, sports, anything we've looked at in the past. I mean, again, we are relationship driven. If there's any way that we can be helpful, give you our perspective, trade notes on deals, trade notes on specific investments, talk the good, the bad about sports. We are hopefully very candid, transparent, honest, and we're just excited to learn what we don't know, look at new opportunities, and to do life and business together with new folks. So really, really appreciate your time, Kyle, and look forward to talking soon.
Yep. Thanks, Marley.